Okay, I'm going to try to be very brief because I know you have a lot of people waiting to testify, and I have different access to discussing these issues with you on a later date that these people who are going to testify don't. So I'll try to be very quick on this. My bill, of course, I feel it's very important. I've had it over time at least 3 or 4 times, so I think an assault weapons ban bill is very important. But I want to touch on what Senator Archambault discussed, which is screening for mental health. And I'll go into that a little bit more, but I want him to be aware the way I discuss this bill and other bills is that I think, screening for mental health is very important. But the Las Vegas shooting and the Parkland shooting, both of those, we might not have caught those people with further screening for mental health. And as far as an assault weapons ban is concerned, those guns were acquired legally, and we can do better than that in Rhode Island. My concern is also, and I know you've had testimony and you'll have further testimony probably from law enforcement, that they want to be protected out in the street, that they're outgunned in the street. And the people who have those guns probably have never had encountered a situation in which they would be mental health screened, never mind access to health care or mental health care. They're just not screened for mental health and probably wouldn't be caught if they were. So I think we need more protection than what just one bill does. And that's a real crux of my testimony, is that it's not about one bill. We've reached a point where I don't think we'd solve this problem with one bill. We had a job training package. We had a package where we reformed the commerce, the EDC, what used to be EDC. It didn't take one bill to do that. It took 10 bills to do that. The opioid overdose crisis, we didn't solve that with one bill, and we're not going to solve it with one bill. We had 8 bills last year on this. The justice reform package was at least 10 bills. In order to make families and students and law enforcement feel safer in Rhode Island, it has to be more than one bill. And I wanted to get to Senator Rep. Taka's point about we're going to use Florida as a barometer. I don't think Florida is the right barometer for Rhode Island. Florida doesn't have a governor supporting this legislation, doesn't have an attorney general supporting this legislation. It doesn't have the polling numbers that Rhode Island has that we saw today. It doesn't have 34 legislators on the red flag bill, 34 senators out of 36. It doesn't have 19 out of 36 on the assault weapons ban bill. It doesn't have a vast majority of support by not only legislators, the attorney generals, law enforcement. These bills have a tremendous amount of support. So what I hope you hear from, and I know you're going to hear from people other than myself who have a really important voice, is, I hope you hear from the student when you consider magazines and assault weapons. Hope you hear from the students that want 3 seconds, the shortest time in which you can reload a magazine that they could get out of a room. I hope you hear from law enforcement that also wants that 3 seconds. I hope you hear from the surgeons, the doctors, that go from a wound that's treatable from a piercing injury from a .22, rather than the untreatable wound from an explosive injury from an assault weapon that we're trying to ban. I hope you hear from that surgeon. And I hope you hear from the lawyers that will explain to you that not only at the Supreme Court level, but when we talked about assault weapon bans, whether we talk about magazine restrictions, whether we talk about bump stocks, that the appeals courts, the local courts, the appeals courts, and the Supreme Courts have ruled that those restrictions in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and DC, and several other states have all met the scrutiny that the courts have gotten those legislation. And I can guarantee you that if these bills aren't in the same condition as the bills that passed that court scrutiny in those states, we're ready to make them able to meet the court scrutiny in those states. So I'll reiterate one thing I said the other day when we signed these bills last week, the assault weapons bill especially, that I really hope that we do what it'll take to make students and teachers feel safer in their classrooms. And one bill will not do that. I think all of these bills will bring us closer to doing that. Remember the time, because it no longer exists, when parents were really excited to see the excitement on a student's face because of the learning experience they had that day in school. And what do they come home with in the last few weeks? Fear and anxiety. I think we have to do something based on that, if nothing else. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jabbour.
Thank you. I want to thank Senator Miller for the sponsorship. But Senator, you, back in February of last year, we had the Health and Service, Human Service Committee have mental health hearings, and I know Senator Archambault was addressing some of those issues. What in those findings, you did mention justice reinvestment. I noticed there was something in there too with regard to psychiatric services, the lack of number of psychiatrists here in Rhode Island, and issues with insurance premium, getting people mental health. What is in that report that can help us with the gun legislation?
Well, I think, I talked about when I was addressing Senator Archambault's concern about getting more mental health scrutiny as part of the permitting process, and if we do red flag and how it pertains to that also. My concern in being the health chair and looking at these issues and having a mental health package that hopefully improved mental health access to mental health services, that we have a real shortage of everything but inpatient, and that's why it's really expensive in Rhode Island. We have a lot of gaps in inpatient care. And what it does to gun bills and the kind of scrutiny that we want around mental health, first of all, it leaves out the vast majority of Rhode Islanders and Americans who never seek mental health treatment, and therefore they aren't included in part of the screening. And so we have gaps. People don't access mental health care. So it's really tough and subjective to make it more part of the process than it should be, and to improve. It's part of why we are where we are, and it's why it's more complicated than one bill or one effort.
Because that report, the finding and recommendations, I think, is a very good starting point when you try to put a glove on the legislation. The problem is, as you state, everybody doesn't come in contact, and part of the Justice Reinvestment Commission, everybody's not in contact with the criminal system who has these issues. So how do we find them until something bad happens? So thank you, Senator.